As an initial point, I think we can identify a number of trends in EU external relations, external policy, which we can see reflected in the approach taken in the Lisbon Treaty. The first is there's the enormous expansion of external relations activities, the visibility of external relations, and the importance of external relations for the European Union's sense of its own identity and its own place in the world in relation to its own member states, as well as to, of course, in the international community. The second one is related to that, and it's the growth in particular of the importance of the common foreign security policy and what's becoming the CSDP. And the third element, which may seem to be counter to this trend, but I don't think is, in fact, is what Peter-Jan Kuiper referred to once as the stronger grip of the member states in relation to external policy. The way in which the member states are seeking to retain their position in external policy. And we see that in relation to the European Council, but in the CFSP, in a number of different ways. Pulling those together in a way, what we have is a dialogue that's going on between the institutions and the member states, and I would include among the institutions the Court of Justice, on questions relating to competence, relating to compatibility between member state action and union action, questions of legal base, the scope and the duty of cooperation. In other words, I think what we're seeing is a process of working out ways of ensuring that what we might call the discipline of the EU outside the scope of traditional preemption or exclusive competence. So I think as you know, the context in which we're looking at these treaty changes, these treaty developments, is that with the increased visibility of external relations, the importance of external relations, the role of the member states, and really quite interesting attempts to accommodate those, I think, both in institutional structures but also in substantive ways. We can see in the Lisbon Treaty a sort of concomitant emphasis on the one hand, the projection of the identity of the European Union, externally the development of some kind of distinctive EU voice in foreign policy. We can see an emphasis on coherence. We just came to a seminar we had earlier this week, where I was talking about coherence and consistency, and I'm not going to say more about that today, because I've had my say on that this week, but it's definitely a theme of the Lisbon Treaty. There's a considerable emphasis on conferred powers, the principle of conferred powers. It's repeated again and again, but particularly in the external context, but also in other contexts. And there is an emphasis as well on what you might call the treaty as codification. The treaty is putting into institutionalized form practices which have developed over the years, and we can see that in a number of contexts in the external dimension, including neighbourhood policy, but also a couple of the things that I want to talk about. I thought I would talk about three things. The first is in the context of this idea of the development of a distinctive European Union voice in the world. I would say something about strategy formation, and in particular the role of the European Council. And I guess that links a little bit to what Thomas will say later on the triangle or the quadrangle or whatever you want to call it. Secondly, picking up on this notion of the involvement of the member states, I wanted to look at say a little bit about flexibility and enhanced cooperation in the CFSP, and in particular the common security and defence policy. And thirdly, to say just a little bit, make a couple of points about mixed agreements. I guess what the overall sense that I have in thinking about the Lisbon Treaty from the point of view of the institutions and institutional structures is something that I think people would probably share in looking at many other fields and issues, not just external policy, is that we have a number of initiatives, a number of changes made which are creating spaces and opportunities which may or may not be used. And as Bruno said right at the beginning, we're in a slightly tricky position here because it's too early days to know really how these provisions are going to be used. So there's a certain amount of potential in the treaty, and what will be made of it is up for discussion, and one can be a sort of inveterate optimist or a bit more